Good evening, Accelerated Math. Tonight's lesson is on dividing when the divisor is a decimal. The divisor is the number you divide by. So you could alternately call this dividing by a decimal. We divided decimals, but we never divided by a decimal. And the reason for that is I wanted you to understand dividing by a fraction first, because dividing by a fraction, dividing by a decimal are kind of the same thing. Because I wanted you to get used to the idea of dividing and the answer being higher than you started with, which is very weird. And I think it's easier to start with a fraction with that than a decimal. So if you understand how to divide by a fraction, and you understand how to divide decimals, there's not really going to be anything new here. It's just going to be kind of a combination of two skills we've already done. So after you've got your title or titles written down, you can unpause and mark your page with your pencil and think real hard on the I do. Alright, so let me remind you real fast how to divide decimals. So back, it has been a little while since we did this. We've been dealing with fractions since then. So 4 popcorns at the Brookwood game cost $8.72. How much did each one cost? So when I divide $8.72 by the 4 I'm going to buy, what I did is I just totally ignored my decimal and then figured out where it went at the end. So I'm just going to pretend it's not even there and do 4 times 2 is 8. 0, 7, 4 times, can't even do 2, 4 times 1 is 4. That's 3. And I've specifically chose this one so there'd be no remainder. We don't have to deal with a fraction or a decimal farther at the end. 32, and that is 8. So I've got my answer. And now all I have to do is figure out where do I put the decimal in a way that makes any sense. So what I did in this problem is I took about $8 and divided it by 4. So just by estimating, I'm looking for an answer that's around 2. So obviously the decimal has to go here. $2.18 kind of makes sense. $2, a little more than $2 each, a little more than $8 should work out. So when we divide by a decimal, same thing. I just didn't show it to you before because I didn't want you to kind of freak out when the answer's higher. So like, let's take this example. A certain race at the Olympics is 6 2/10 miles long. Each lap around a track is 25 hundredths miles. How many laps is the race? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take 6 2/10 miles. I'm going to divide it by the length of the laps, and I'm going to see how many laps it is. Now, what's going to happen? This is kind of like dividing by a fourth. So the race is going to be more than 6 laps, right? I'm dividing by a fraction, so I'm going to go up. And I just didn't want you to be surprised by that before. But to do it, I'm going to just ignore the decimals for a while. Ignore, and I'm going to just kind of do this like a normal problem. So 25 goes into 62 2 times. That makes 50. And let's see, that leaves me with 12. Excuse me. So I'm going to have to treat this now like a decimal problem. I know that obviously the race is more than 2 laps. So I'm going to have to do this like it's a decimal problem and keep extending. So instead of doing 6 2/10, I'm going to imagine I was originally dividing 6 20 hundredths because I just need to keep going to get a more reasonable answer. So let's see, 25 times 4 is 100. 25. Another one would be 125, so I can only do 4. 4 times 25 is 100. That leaves me with 20. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go out to my thousands. I could probably stop here, but I'm going to keep going a little more. This is going to end it for me. So when I bring down this 0, 25 is going to go into 200 an equal number of times. It goes into 104 times. So it goes into 208 times. So there's my digits of my answer. And so now all that's left is to find reasonably where my decimal goes. You probably don't even need to think about it mathematically here. You know, if you think about a 6-mile race, 4 laps make a mile. And so like I think you can imagine it's not 248 laps, you know, and it's not 2.5 laps. And it's certainly not a quarter of a lap. Like, none of those make sense just thinking about it. But if you didn't put that together, you know, what you're doing, you're taking 6 and you're dividing it by about a fourth, which is the same as multiplying 6 times 4 holes, which is 24. So I'm looking for a place that's about 24 laps. And so here, it's actually not quite 25 laps to run that race. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it, right? 4 laps, 1 mile, 8 laps, 2 miles, 12 laps, 3 miles, 16 laps, 4 miles, 25 miles, 24 laps would make 6 miles plus almost 1 more lap. You know, if this was this, it'd be 1 more lap. But it's not quite. It's a little less than that. So 24 and 8/10 laps. The same thing. It's not really anything new. I just wanted to kind of save it till you had all the skills. Let's do one together. 4/10 ounces of Gatorade mix are needed for each pint of Gatorade when you mix it yourself. A package comes with 25 ounces of mix. How many pints of Gatorades can you make with the package? So I'm going to take 25 and I'm going to divide it by 4/10. And again, just don't be surprised. It makes sense when you stop and think it's going to be more than 25 pints, right? If I can make more than 2 pints with 1 ounce, makes sense I'm going to be able to make more than 25 ounces. And before I didn't know if you were ready to think that way. So let's take my 25 ounces and let's divide it by my 4/10 of an ounce per serving, and let's just ignore that decimal for the time being. So let's see, 4 can't go into 2, so I'm going to go straight into 25. 4 times 6 is 24. Lose me 1. And with these problems, when you've got a decimal or a double decimal, it's going to be best to work out some more decimal places. So I'm going to imagine instead of dividing 25 whole, I divided 25 and no tenths. I'm still going to ignore this decimal, but I need to extend my number to get farther in here because 6 doesn't make sense. It's going to be more than 6. It's going to be more than 6 pints. That wouldn't even make sense. So I know I need some more digits here. So let's go out a little. So let's do 4 times 2 is 8. Let's give myself another 0. No hundredths. Oh, and this is going to end it for me because I can tell 4 times 5 is 20, and I'm going to be done. So all that's left is to figure out where my decimal goes. So I guess a good approximation, you know, my question is, can I make 625 pints? Can I make 62 and a half pints? Can I make 6 1/4 pints? Can I make not even a pint? Like all these choices of where my decimal goes, I've got to pick the best one. You may already know which one's the most reasonable. To me, this is roughly 25 divided by a half, which is the same as 25 times the reciprocal of a half, which is 50. So I'm looking for one that gives me around 50 servings, and the only one that's anywhere in the reasonable amount is that one. So I can make 62 and a half pints of Gatorade from my mix. So there you go. That's dividing by a decimal. Once you feel like you've got this, you need to go back and watch the I do or the we do again. You know, make sure you feel like you have a good understanding of this. And when you get to class tomorrow, you can talk through it with somebody on a you do together. But once you are there and you've got this written down, you are all done. See you tomorrow.